best supercar you can think of? Is it a Lamborghini? A Porsche? Yeah, your mind probably went straight to Ferrari. No one does supercars like the Italians do, and Ferrari is the best of them. Or at least, that's what the world thought back in the 80s, but that was about to change. Because in the mid-80s, Honda decided they wanted a piece of the supercar pie. The company that made these silly commercials also wanted to build a new supercar to beat Ferrari in their own game. And before you start laughing, you might want to consider these facts. Honda is not afraid of taking on big challenges. Just months after they started making their first ever car, which was this cute little pickup, they started racing in Formula 1. And while that pickup had a really small 4-cylinder engine, their F1 car had a V12 that revved all the way up to 14,000 RPMs, which allowed them to get their first ever F1 win in their second F1 season. So in just 2 years, Honda went from making their first car to winning an F1 race. It wouldn't be the first time Honda beats Ferrari. Honda, the same brand that made these things, was also making the engines of the teams that dominated the F1 championship from 1986 to 1991. With Williams and especially McLaren, Honda took the F1 throne away from Ferrari. So now they wanted to do it again, but with supercars. The big bosses of Honda explained to their development team what the plan was. They were going to build a supercar that would outperform Ferrari, and their benchmark would be the Ferrari 348, a red stallion that had a 300 horsepower V8 and that could go from 0 to 60 in just 5.6 seconds. It wasn't an easy target. However, since this car would be a Honda after all, it would have to be reliable, economical, and easy to drive. Words that had never been used to describe a supercar. But that's just how Honda did things, and they wanted to prove that the best supercars are not only European, that Japan can also get in the game without changing their philosophy on how they make cars. So, the development team started working on this new project, which they called Project NSX for the new Sports Experimental. And since their F1 journey was a total success, they decided they would use all the knowledge they got from F1 into this new car, meaning the car would be light, great through corners, and have a high-revving engine placed behind the driver's seat, powering its rear wheels. And that was a problem, because Honda had never built anything like that. All their cars had the engine in the front, powering the front wheels. What they were looking to build with this car was the exact opposite. So the team had to figure out how to build a car like this with no prior experience. But instead of doing some boring research on how to build a mid-engine car, they took a Honda City, literally putting the engine inside the cabin between the front and back wheels, and drove it around. And after doing some testing on a private track, they found out something. It was incredibly fun. This experiment was key to developing their new supercar, but obviously they weren't going to be using the Honda City to build the supercar. They needed a brand new design. So they asked Pininfarina to design a sports car for them. Pininfarina were famous for some of their designs, like the Ferrari Testarossa and even the legendary Ferrari F40. They designed a concept car called the Honda HPX, which had a smooth and streamlined body inspired by the F-16 fighter jet. And Honda immediately loved the design. It might not look super nice, but back in the 80s, concept cars were not looking good. This one was a beauty back then. So they started developing a street car based on this concept. They asked Pininfarina to help them design a street version of the car, and this is what they came out with: the Honda NSX. And since they wanted this car to feel as close as possible to an F1 car, they needed to make it super light and stiff. So they decided that the NSX would have the world's first monocoque body for a production car made entirely out of aluminium. They used the fastest supercomputer in the world at the time to make the chassis of the car as stiff as possible. And when the computer reached its limits, Honda just handed the keys of the car to F1 legend Ayrton Senna, who took the car that the supercomputer had created and pushed it to the limit, to find out that it was actually quite fragile. But Honda made the great decision of listening to Senna and started working on the rigidity of the car on track instead of doing it completely on a computer. So they set up a temporary base near the Nürburgring and called Japan's first F1 driver to push the car through the green hell, looking for rigidity flaws. And this whole experiment proved to work, because the NSX now had a stiffer chassis than a Porsche 911. The first prototype was powered by the V6 engine from the Honda Legend, which produced 250 horsepower and could rev up to 7,000 RPMs. And even though that wasn't the engine that would eventually be in the final version of the car, it did become useful to do one of the coolest marketing strategies I've ever seen. At the 1989 Chicago Auto Show, the CEO of Honda at the time arrived the day before the public release of the NSX and revved that engine all the way up to its red line, while Ford was holding its press conference next door, making sure that every car journalist in the room with Ford wondered what the hell that noise was, and go check the NSX in its official reveal the next day. Brilliant. But a Honda sports car still had to have one ingredient left: VTEC. So they designed a new V6 engine with VTEC, and for the first time for a V6 Honda, they added double overhead crankshafts. And after half a decade of development, what started as an experiment with a mid-engine Honda City became this Japanese Ferrari Killer. It was faster than a Ferrari in a straight line and quicker than a Porsche in the corners. It did 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds. That's almost half a second faster than the Ferrari they had as a benchmark. When it came out in 1990, every car magazine said it was a game changer that would take Ferrari out of business. Because not only did it have better performance than a Ferrari, it was also reliable, economical, and easy to drive. That didn't seem possible for a supercar until then. So it was clear, Honda had once more defeated Ferrari. Or did they? I mean, if the goal was to make a faster and more usable car than Ferrari, then yes, Honda won fair and square. But if we look at the sales numbers, Honda didn't even come close. The problem was that Honda built a supercar for its typical customer, but those weren't really the supercar owner kind of clients. People who buy supercars don't want reliability or efficiency. They want adrenaline and fear. They want to get in the car knowing that it wants to kill them every time they step on the gas.
Mate, Jesus Christ.
And the NSX just didn't have that. After 15 years in production, Honda discontinued the NSX in 2005. The project had been kind of a successful failure, since they literally had built the perfect supercar that no one wanted to buy. But when a decade later they started to build a second generation of the NSX, they decided to go with the exact same concept. Props to them for consistency and staying true to themselves, but the new NSX was still the wrong supercar concept for the market. And instead of bragging about 0 to 60 numbers or trying to break records at the Nürburgring, they were proud that the new NSX had a quiet startup function, so you could get out of the house in the morning without bothering your neighbors. Who gives a fuck about bothering your neighbors? People just want a supercar to go fast and look at death in the eyes. And again, the NSX didn't have that. And after 2 failed attempts to enter the supercar market, you'd probably wonder why they even bothered building a supercar that no one really wants. But what's the alternative? Forgetting your true philosophy on how to build cars? Manufacture cars like any other product just for profit? Build the same cars over and over to follow trends and cut costs? That's just sad. Even if it fails, a car like this is always worth it to remind the world that cars are more than just numbers. The NSX is a demonstration of what Honda is capable of doing, a high-performance supercar while staying true to its roots.